Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. If I can encourage you to take your seats, we'll start our next panel. Our final panel discussion this afternoon is about the global nature of cyber activity. Our panel moderator is Major General Rob Rigo, who serves as the mobilization assistant to the commander of Air Force Global Strike Command. Sir, I'll let you take it from here and do the introductions.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We've got a tough slot to fill this afternoon. We're not immediately after lunch, but we're certainly in the twilight of the day as folks look to move on to this evening's festivities. But I do want to say good afternoon and welcome, and I'd like to add my thanks to the Space Foundation for their hosting of the third annual Cyber Day proceedings. This one is a full day. I can recall when we started Cyber 1.0 a couple years ago. The Broadmoor put us over on the west facility in a broom closet, and we barely filled up a couple of hours. And we really actually just captured folks that had come in early for the Space Symposium. And now I understand that folks that signed up for the cyber piece of this are growing by leaps and bounds. So thanks to Elliot and particularly to the Space Foundation Director of Operations, Art Ratkowitz, for setting this up. It certainly gets larger and larger each year, and my prediction is as we move forward in time, we will see the two symposiums merge and become integrated, much like Secretary Creedon spoke about the two domains of space and cyber becoming more integrated as we move forward in time. Today we'll have a brief session on the international aspects of cyber. I've got two folks with me who will share their perspectives, and what I would though is encourage you that in addition to the two panelists that you see here before you today, I'd encourage you to expand your questions to our other international partners that you see and meet throughout the symposium this week. There's a fairly large delegation from Germany in. We will also see as the days wear on, folks come in from Great Britain, France, and many other nations. So take this opportunity to take advantage of the 28th Space Symposium, which has a decidedly international flair. More and more as we delve into this cyber domain, we find an increasing condition in which traditional geographic borders hold little meaning. Further, time is compressed, giving rise to how uncomfortable we feel when it comes to our traditional alliances that move at the diplomatic pace of the 19th century. Finally, we've collectively struggled to adapt our organizational structures to this lack of boundaries, these borderless domains, as Secretary Creedon told us at lunch, the speed at which information flows, and the overall rate of pace of change. And as you formulate questions for the two folks to my left, I would ask that you think about the things that are different in our world as opposed to those things that might be challenging our European allies or our commercial and civil partners in the U.S. Our first panelist for today is Stefan Somm. He's the Chief of Strategic Foundations and Political Analysis at the German Ministry of Defense. Mr. Somm began his career in armored infantry, studied law at the University of Constance, and has held a series of responsible posts within the MOD and in the Office of the Secretary of State. His most recent position was as the Commissarial Deputy Director of Defense Policy and Planning. Today he will take a few minutes and discuss the German MOD's perspective on cybersecurity and perhaps touch on the recent changes within the MOD as they relate to cyber. Mr. Sohn?
Yeah, thank you very much, General, for the invitation and for the opportunity to discuss some aspects of the German perspective on cyberspace in the global community. It will be not surprising to you that a representative of the German Ministry of Defense puts the main focus on risks and dangers in cyberspace and on strategies how to face challenges in this field. Nevertheless, I want to make a first remark that it is a general principle of German cyber policy not to confine the topic to security aspects and to downgrade the objectives of openness, transparency, and freedom. The way we guarantee cybersecurity mustn't endanger the opportunities and the utilization of cyberspace. Free access to information and freedom of expression are of paramount importance in our view, and these values are in fact the deeper justification why we have to improve cybersecurity. As just mentioned, I speak to you today as a representative of the newly constituted Policy Directorate of the German Ministry of Defense. And this directorate has been established as a part of the substantial reorganization of the German Armed Forces and the MOD, and it has started its work exactly 2 weeks ago. Thus, to join this meeting here is one of my first tasks, and being here, I think, underlines a bit the relevance we attribute to this issue. You will get on Wednesday from General Weeks a bit of further information about the principles and the details of this reorganization. So I want, in this panel, only mention that as a part of this reorganization process, cybersecurity has been identified as an overarching issue, which will continue to be a challenge at the technical level, of course, but also at the political level as well. In our opinion, a strategic approach to cyberspace must be taken. The aim of this approach is, on the one hand, to ensure the usability of cyberspace, and on the other hand, to promote security interests within and through cyberspace. And this has certainly been considered in our new structure as my branches, of course, amongst various other topics, dealing with the political and the strategic challenges of cybersecurity. Thus, I won't cover here any technical aspects which you anyhow understand much better than I do. Instead, I was asked in preparation for this panel to address mainly 3 issues. First, what is the relationship between military, government, and corporate cyber organizations? Second, who is the national lead for cyber activity? And third, what do we consider as the primary cyber threat? And on those issues, I want to elaborate for a few minutes. In Germany, cybersecurity has really been on the mind of our political actors with the adoption of NATO's strategic concept in 2010, as well as with the publication of the German National Cybersecurity Strategy in February 2011. Additionally, the focus given to cybersecurity through multiple conferences and studies certainly has persuaded the mind of those who neglected the importance and urgency of the topic so far. Within the German government, the responsibility for cybersecurity is broken down as follows. The Ministry of the Interior has the overall lead. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is responsible for what we call cyber diplomacy, and the MOD itself has been given a threefold role, which I will discuss later. The character of cyberspace dictates an approach that includes not only the state's apparatus, but the whole society. It also requires as much of an international effort as possible. And so the German cybersecurity strategy reflects exactly this broad networked approach. It builds on the success of the efforts of the last years to construct and organize a comprehensive defense of critical national information systems in Germany. It sets the strategy into the context of Germany's foreign and security policy and reaches out to industry, commerce, and indeed the private users themselves. And the strategy clearly understands that the new dimension of the challenge requires closer coordination and collaboration at the strategic level. Only on this basis we can organize the protection of national information systems and provide assistance and advice to private enterprises and users in facing increasing risks in cyberspace. To put it simply, we need to channel crucial information on anomalies in CRS performance, intelligence information on malicious intent and their background, and the technical means to counter them much faster between all the actors involved. And finally, we need a better understanding of which agencies might provide the specific tools needed to counter the threat. And to this end, the German strategy introduced 2 new bodies to supplement the structures which have already been formed by the National Plan for the Protection of Critical Information Systems at the strategic level. The first institution is the National Cybersecurity Council, which is the highest coordination body of consisting of state secretaries from the Ministries of Defense, Finance, Justice, Economy, Research, and the Federal Chancellery. Reflecting the responsibilities, as mentioned before, it is chaired by the State Secretary of the Ministry of the Interior. And this body is complemented by representatives from the states of the German Federation and, if required, other ministries. industry, as well as experts from the academia may also be invited to participate. And this council convenes on a regular basis to discuss strategic issues to cybersecurity, but it may also be called upon in a particular crisis. The second newly formed body is the Cyber Response Center. It is the working body within this revised national structure. It was stood up and is co-located with the Federal Office for Information Security, the so-called BSI. The center itself is not a formal new agency, but rather a permanent forum of the most important actors in cybersecurity. The nucleus is formed by the BSI itself, plus the Interior Intelligence Service, the Federal Agency for Disaster Relief and Protection, the Foreign Intelligence Service, the Criminal Investigation Service of the Federal Police, Finance Administration, and eventually the German Armed Forces supplement the center. And the center is not intended to be executive, but rather to harness all the information about the state of CIS concerns, possible originators, their motivation, etc., and then disseminate critical information to tackle a crisis, as well as provide advice and techniques to resolve the issue. Let me now come to the end and just say something about the role of the armed forces. The armed forces perspective in Germany on cybersecurity consists of three different elements. First of all, as a user of cyberspace as a work tool, we need, just like any other state or private organization, to protect our own critical cyber infrastructure. Within the Federal Armed Forces, these aspects of cyber defense are the responsibility of the Chief Information Officer, the so-called IT Director. And this task he fulfills in close coordination with the already mentioned Federal Office of Information Security. The second point is, by virtue of its primary mission, to protect and defend Germany as a whole, it might be unlikely, but it cannot be excluded in general that a severe cyber attack could cause effects which are comparable with those of a classic armed attack. And in such a situation, there could arise specific tasks for the armed forces, despite the clear distinction between external and internal security, which is laid down in the German constitution, but which is always cause a problem in cyberspace, but because no one really can define how we can apply this distinction on acts in cyberspace. And the third point is, and that's obviously the first priority of the Federal Armed Forces, is to safeguard its own freedom in planning and conducting military operations, and when necessary and appropriate, to hamper and restrict the use of cyberspace by the adversary. Modern armed forces are as dependent on cyberspace as any other branches of government or indeed anybody else. The best example from our German perspective is the system of the so-called German infantryman of the future. In this system, the individual soldier is networked, equipped with a digital map, including GPS, a digital compass, a digital camera, a radio for exchange audio messages, and etc. And as a consequence, not only his military capabilities increase, but also his digital vulnerability. And that is the reason why the vulnerabilities and opportunities of cyberspace have to be taken into consideration throughout military planning. Our adversaries are also just as dependent on cyberspace as we are. So we need not only to be prepared for potential disruptions of our use of cyberspace and accordingly make our plans resilient, but we also should seek to exploit our adversaries' vulnerabilities within cyberspace. Actually, in principle, this is nothing new. Disrupting enemies' command and control by interfering with his communications is as old as military operations, but the relevance of this issue increases with our elevated dependence on these capabilities. Consequently, without the capability to act in cyberspace, whether in a defensive or in a proactive way, the German armed forces could eventually fail, not only to fulfill its constitutional mission to protect and defend Germany, but they could also fail in specific military operations. Perhaps you're a bit surprised that I haven't used the very popular term cyber war so far. In fact, in the official German discussion, we hesitate a bit to use this term because it seems a bit inappropriate to us. Cyber war suggests a bit that there could be a conflict between states or other actors comparable with a classic armed conflict only conducted in cyberspace. From a theoretical position, this might be possible, but it seems not very realistic. In fact, we have no indication of this at the moment. What we know is that cyberspace is, in all modern military operations, a decisive domain of warfare. Portions of a military deployment may and certainly will occur in cyberspace, even if such an operation remain a classic land, air, or naval operation. So let me summarize. An effective cybersecurity relies on a truly whole-of-nation approach in combination with strong international cooperation. The German armed forces are well aware that it plays only a narrow, if in our view at least, an important role in this concerted effort. So I think that's all what I've got to say for this moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sam, and I appreciate appreciate your opening remarks, sir, and I suspect that we'll get a whole host of questions as it relates to the German efforts in cybersecurity. Our next panelist is Major General Jay Lindell, USAF retired. Jay now serves as the president of JHL Solutions. General Lindell's experience in this arena dates to his time in Europe, where he was European Command's Chief of the International Division, and during this time he was responsible for 43 nations as our European alliances grew and matured, and as Eastern Europe turned toward the West. Additionally, General Lindell served as the Director of Global Power Programs at the Pentagon, and as General Bosler noted this morning, anyone with a laptop and an internet connection can be considered to wield global power, as it were. Additionally, in another life, General Lindell had firsthand experience with an earlier version of what could be termed the Arab Spring. General Lindell?
Thank you, Rob. And again, thanks for the Space Foundation to supporting Cyberspace 1.2. And there's nothing more critical, I think, going ahead in the future of our nation, the defense of our nation, and our allies than cyberspace in this information-dominant age. But not to reiterate a lot that has already been said about the nature of cyberspace and how we need to confront the threat on the internet, the threat that is threatening our way of life. But something that I took note of today was that 2.2 billion connections over the internet, and 90% of those are outside North America. And that is a great deal of outside the domestic environment, outside the purview of our federal agencies to regulate, control, make policy to confront cyber, to confront the threats on the internet and cyberspace. So this has got to be a global solution to confront the threats on the net today. And with 2.2 billion possible connections of that threat, we aren't going to solve it without international cooperation. And the other thing, I'll bet, that most of us, the first thing we do in the morning is not necessarily make a cup of coffee like we did maybe 10 years ago. Probably the first thing we do today is we make sure our personal communication devices are connected, working, and we check any notes or email, or turn on the internet. Then we go get the coffee. So our way of life has changed and is woven into the fabric of how we operate, how we think, how we make decisions. And that's not just us, it's us on a global nature. It's what we regard today on the internet as our freedom of speech. It's a right. We got to have it. And it's a right worldwide to be able to connect worldwide. However, the global cyber infrastructure is not secure. It's not resilient. We know that. There are threats every day. We've heard many other speakers and panelists talk about it. And it's one of the most serious economic and national security challenges that we'll face here this century. And without major advances in the security of our systems or significant change in the way we operate on a global nature, it is doubtful that we'll actually figure out how to protect ourselves. And the growing threat of cybercrime and state-sponsored intrusions and operations will just significantly increase in the years to come. And the bottom line here is that the very technology that empowers us to innovate, create, power our global economy, also empower those who would disrupt and destroy our economy. And the fundamental problem I see is the organization and the structure. And federally, we are not organized to deal effectively with the problem of cyberspace and the threats that confront us. And responsibilities are distributed across a wide array of federal departments and agencies, many with overlapping authorities and none with sufficient decision authority to really direct actions and deal with the conflicting issues in a consistent way. And if we can't decide how we're going to deal with this, and we still have ongoing debate, we heard Secretary Creedon talk about Department of Homeland Security, but I know in the Cybersecurity Bill of 2012, which hasn't been enacted, there is ongoing debate on roles and responsibilities of Department of Homeland Security versus DoD, whereas you have the Department of Defense with the National Security Agency underneath it as really having a lot of expertise, but roles and responsibilities lie within Department of Homeland Security for interagency. And this is a multi-agency responsibility to deal with this threat. So to constructively put a plan, an organization together, this has to be a public-private sector engagement. And you have to bring in international cooperation. And there is some future policy that has been enacted. State Department in May of last year made a landmark decision or policy statement that said that hostile acts in cyberspace could compel actions under our mutual defense treaties. And I know NATO today is developing the Cyber Incident Response Center that came out of the Lisbon Summit in 2010 and should be complete here within another year. So we are making progress, but this is progress under Department of Defense, utilizing mutual defense treaties, and this is much grander, much bigger than just obviously Department of Defense. And so only by working with our international partners are we ever going to be able to address the challenges, confront the threats, enhance our cybersecurity, and really reap the full benefits of the cyber age and enhance our global economy. And thank you much for being here today, for the opportunity to speak, and look forward to the questions.
Great. Thank you, General Liddell. First question then for Stephen to lead off. We spoke in the preparation about the split between the U.S. DoD and the Department of Homeland Security. You spoke in your remarks about the German National Cybersecurity Council, which has some parallels to bring in different elements and various ministries. General Lindell just spoke about something at the EU level. From a U.S. perspective, the distinctions between within the government and extra government, like the EU, are a bit different to us. Can you speak about the relationships with the EU, particularly the European Network and Information Security Agency, if you can?
I'm not informed in detail about how this relation works, but of course there's some cooperation, but more in the technical field, I think. And on the strategic level, I'm not informed that they have a strategic common approach between the EU and Germany.
Okay.
So far. I'm not sure that this will remain. I'm sure we will also in the international field to develop our international cooperation in the field of cyberspace, but our first challenge in Germany was now to make first a whole of government approach on the national side, because there we have different competences, and in fact we didn't change the different competences of the different government branches in order to face the challenges of cyberspace. So we didn't change competences. We have only these coordinating forums like the Cybersecurity Council and the Cyber Response Center, which are coordinating bodies to bring everything together, but we didn't change. But perhaps we have it in one aspect. It's not so difficult for us because we have a general competence by the Federal Ministry of the Interior. He is in the overall lead for all aspects of cybersecurity. So it's not so difficult to coordinate because we have one ministry and one branch of government in lead.
Okay, thank you. And a follow-up along the same lines, Jay, if, as you ended your opening remarks, that collaboration is key, what form of collaboration would you think would yield the best results in the most immediate time frames?
Well, I think, as I talked about, the landmark foreign policy decision and statement that states that a cyber threat could compel action under our mutual defense treaties. You know, that imperative alone itself will enact federal government collaboration one empowers our federal government, but then through a State Department policy perspective, engage, collaborate with foreign governments, which first we have to have the policies in place, and then we can work on those tools, the processes, the organizations that will make this happen. And this is going to be years down the road till we can really bring together the international community under a lead organization, you might say, with some decision-making and empowering authority to make the processes, to make the justice system. How do you go after cyber crime internationally? What are the norms and standards and protocols that when you convict and bring to justice, especially some anonymous threat that came from some country, do you hold that country responsible when it may be non-state sponsored? So forth, all has to be worked out. Those protocols have to be in place. And then what is the rule of law? What is the definition of cyber crime? All has to be worked out under an international protocol.
Great. Thank you, Jay.
Perhaps I can come in here once more,
sure.
because I think that's a very interesting point, and as I'm from my origin a lawyer, I'm quite familiar with the legal discussion, especially in the international field, and there are a lot of conferences and discussions that we have to develop international law on cyberspace. From my perspective, I'm a bit hesitating that this is in the moment the best appropriate way to improve cybersecurity, but for the first time it's a bit difficult to develop an international law because we don't really know in the moment, or don't have a consent among governments and states, what is the real existing law in the moment on cyberspace. There are a lot of discussions, so perhaps we should first make a kind of a legal stock take. What is our current legal situation with reference to cyberspace before we can discuss to develop international law? And the next problem with reference to international law or to binding legal agreements is the problem that the structure of our international law in the moment is, I would call actor-orientated. That means treaties, they stipulate special regulations of behavior for actors. And the problem is in cyberspace we often don't know who the actors really are. So perhaps we should change our perspective in international law a bit away from the actor-orientated law to a perhaps even victim-orientated law. That makes the law should concentrate on the event as such, or perhaps even on the victim, because sometimes we have situations in Germany or in other countries that if perhaps private companies are a victim of a cyber attack, they keep it secret. They don't go to the public authorities because it's always a bit an embarrassing situation for a private company to be a victim of a cyber attack. They would lose trust, they would lose customers, and perhaps in this field we could think of developing international law much further, but I think it's a bit too early. In the moment, we believe that we would come more to quick results if we stress so-called confident and security-building measures between states. That means a form of deeper exchange of cyber strategies to establish perhaps international accepted points of contact in the case of a cyber attack, early warning mechanisms, or perhaps to create even special communication links between states to face dangerous incidents in the cyberway. And that should be the first step. And in the next step, perhaps in some years, we can develop legally binding international law for the international cooperation.
Thank you, Stu. You spoke in there about a distinction between victims and unknown actors, which gets to a point we spoke about before. From a U.S. perspective, the internet was designed with anonymity and ease of use in mind. And of course, as you move away from any of those basic tenets, you bring rise to people that are concerned about limiting use of the internet, controlling the internet, the idea of a kill switch. Can you speak to the German thoughts on privacy, anonymity, and control of the internet?
Yes, of course. As I pointed out at the beginning of my statement, we have the position that the free access of internet and the right of information, and of course a certain right of anonymity should be granted. And of course there's perhaps a certain conflict to security, but we shouldn't use the security issue to to play down the individual rights in the information sphere. I think that's a quite clear position of Germany.
Thank you.
And Rob, if I could just add, within our own country, and Ms. Creedon had talked about the ongoing debate with the Cyberspace Security Act of 2012, still a bill, not enacted, but the ongoing congressional debate centered around the fact that the internet had to remain not overly regulated. It couldn't impinge upon rights. And especially for Americans who regard the internet as a right as a freedom of speech in our social networks, we have to be very careful going forward on any regulation and policy directives on the internet. And this gets into maybe like the gun control debate sort of thing. And it'll be as a given right to be on the internet.
We've got time for one more. You spoke, Stephen, in your remarks about the distinction between and the reticence of Germany to use the term warfare within the cyber domain. We spoke previously about the idea that cyber attack may be a good common middle ground. Of course, many in the civil sector and the commercial arena see it as another form of espionage. From Germany's perspective, what do you see as the main threats to German national security and maybe even within the MOD, German military power?
Well, I think that the main threat in cyberspace is certainly more in the field of cyber crimes, of cyber espionage, not in the classical field of interstate warfare. Of course, in an interstate war, cyberspace will be used as the well-known domain of warfare, but as a single threat, I think it's more the aspects of crimes and espionage which will be more important as single acts in cyberspace, because the great advantage for an actor in cyberspace is the anonymity. And if we refer it to classical terms of warfare, anonymity is not only a problem for the victim of an attack, but also for the attacker. But if we understand the war in a classical field, in a classical sense, as a rational political instrument, which main purpose is to impose the will of the aggressor to this one or the enemy, then he can't stay or remain anonymous, because everyone has to know what his will really is. And so I think the cyberspace, a single form of acting, is more a form or a domain for criminals, terrorists, and espionage,
Sure.
less than classical warfare.
Jay, I'll give you the final word. Stephen summed up a bit of Clausewitz. Do you have any? Do you have any
directly, but
Duhay to bring forward as an air power?
Well, that's a very good thought. There is, when you define what the cyberspace we've talked about, that it's every one of us is engaged in nearly every part of our daily lives in cyberspace. And it is much like air power. It's an overall domain. And unless you control, unless you have ability to operate in cyberspace, we're not going to be effective, whether as a Department in Defense and future warfare. We've got to be able to control the cyberspace environment. We've got to be able to have freedom to operate. And it is a very important warfighting domain. And much grander than that, more important to the survival of our economy, meaning our energy distribution networks, our banking, our financial, our transportation system. So very important going forward for us as a nation to put a lot of work, a lot of thought, a lot of energy, and the expertise resides obviously in the private sector and corporate world to get us there.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up our time today. I'd ask that you congratulate our panelists, and also, if you have a chance as this breaks up today and throughout the week, to buttonhole them for questions that I couldn't get to today. Thank you very much for your time.
We'd like to thank General Rigo, General Lindell, and Mr. Sohm for sharing their thoughts and ideas about international issues with cyberspace. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, we'll take a short 15-minute break. Our thanks to Cybersecurity Summit 2012 for co-sponsoring Cyber 1.2's afternoon break.